You are seated before me, not by accident. I speak not only to your conscious mind, which may be distracted by the day's concerns, but to your unconscious, to the murmurings within that have long stirred but lacked language. You may have felt this stirring, a vague ache, a sense of burden, a call to something more, or perhaps the weight of the world upon shoulders that were never trained to carry it. If so, then this message is for you, and you are closer to the archetype of the spiritual empath than you realize. There exists a category of individuals, rare, mysterious, often tormented, who walk among us like dreamers carrying torches through the fog. These individuals do not merely sympathize or show compassion. They become the pain of the other. They absorb what is invisible, intangible, the psychic suffering of the world, as if their soul were a tuning fork struck by the tremors of unseen calamities. You may think this is a virtue, and often it is praised as such, but tonight I must reveal to you a truth that is darker, older, and more dangerous than you have perhaps allowed yourself to know. The spiritual empath does not merely choose to feel, they are compelled to. And what compels them is not merely the moral will, but something deeper, often unconscious. It is the force of the archetype, of the collective shadow, which takes root in the overly porous boundary between the self and the other. They were born without certain walls in their soul. This is a sacred burden, but it is also a curse when unintegrated. Now let us descend together, not into pathology, but into the sacred underground of the psyche, the place where myth meets biology, where your dreams whisper secrets that you were taught to forget. The empath is often forged in trauma, not trauma of the ordinary sort, alone, though abandonment, neglect, emotional abuse, and generational wounds are common companions, but a soul trauma where the child comes to believe that their own existence is only justified by tending to the emotions of others. They become the invisible therapist in the home. They silence their own voice to become the echo of everyone else's need. Their unconscious contract becomes, if I can keep you happy, then I will be safe. But safety in this pact always demands self-erasure. As they grow, they become not simply attuned to emotion, but possessed by it. They walk into rooms and sense tension before a word is spoken. They dream of drowning in someone else's grief. Their compassion is not calm, but torrential. Their body reacts to another's despair before the mind can explain why, and they call it love. When often it is identification with suffering, do you recognize this in yourself? That you carry the pain of others like a second skin, that your joy feels dangerous and your boundaries feel like betrayal, that when others cry, you bleed. This is not just temperament. This is an archetypal calling, but it is also a psychic danger. The danger is this: the empath becomes a sponge without a center. Their identity collapses into the sorrow they absorb. They become martyr, caretaker, therapist, even saint, but all the while they are losing themselves. And in that loss, the unconscious finds an opening for where there is no strong ego. The archetypes possess, let me speak clearly, the spiritual empath is often unconsciously serving the wounded healer archetype. This archetype which I explored in the figure of Chiron, represents the paradox of one who heals others but cannot heal themselves. It is a noble image, the shaman scarred by fire, the priest trembling with secret wounds, but when lived unconsciously, it destroys the person in the name of virtue. You may be bleeding while dressing the wounds of the world. Why do you find it easier to forgive others than yourself? Why do you shrink when you're praised, yet burn when others are shamed? Why does the suffering of the world feel more real to you than your own needs? Your own desires, your own anger. Because the empath, especially the spiritual empath, has been taught by family, society, even religion, that their value lies in their use to others. And so their unconscious compensates by giving them a spiritual identity that keeps them useful, the compassionate one, the understanding one, the healer. They do not live for themselves, but for the projected wounds of others. They become a mirror, beautiful, shining, but mirrors do not have their own voice. And eventually, if they are not careful, they shatter. Now, understand me, this is not an indictment. It is a call not to abandon your gifts, but to differentiate them. For differentiation is the core task of individuation. It is the work of becoming who you truly are. Apart from the projections of your childhood, your community, your unconscious loyalty to pain, true empathy, integrated empathy, does not drown in the sea of emotion. It stands on the shore and offers a hand. But the spiritual empath, before this integration, has one foot in the water and one in the fire, and they are slowly consumed by both. Dreams of fire and water are common in the spiritual empath. Fear consumes, water overwhelms. They are symbols of transformation and of the unconscious, respectively. One night, you dream of standing in a burning house, trying to rescue someone who won't leave. Another night, you're in an ocean, arms flailing, unable to breathe. These are not random. They are messages from the unconscious. You are rescuing too many. You are drowning in what is not yours. This brings us to the crucial Jungian concept of the shadow. What is repressed in the empath is not evil, but selfishness. Yes, I said it, selfishness. The right to say no, the right to desire, the right to feel anger and not transform it into a smile, the right to rest, the right to demand care instead of always offering it. But because these qualities were shamed or punished in childhood, they were sent into the unconscious. The empath then becomes a person who identifies with light, kindness, compassion, selflessness, and disowns their shadow. But the psyche, as you know, does not tolerate imbalance. That his own shadow leaks out, sometimes in passive aggression, sometimes in psychosomatic illness, sometimes in uncontrollable resentment toward those they help. The very people they serve become their prison. The spiritual empath must confront this shadow or else be devoured by it. They must reclaim their anger, not as violence, but as boundaried energy. They must honor their exhaustion, not as failure, but as the body's wisdom. They must listen not only to the pain of others, but to their own soul's weeping. And now we enter the most difficult terrain, the collective unconscious. For the empath is not only absorbing individual pain, no, they are often absorbing the collective grief of a broken world, war, injustice, ancestral trauma. These live in the psychic field, and the sensitive individual picks up on them like a radio tuned to frequencies that others have long forgotten. They feel grief without cause. They mourn without memory. They carry the ache of centuries, and this can drive one mad if not recognized for what it is, a mystical, mythopoetic inheritance. You are not only your name, your biography, you are a vessel for ancestral patterns, archetypal forces, mythic echoes. The spiritual empath is often the descendant of those who were silenced, scapegoated, burned for their sensitivity. They are the child of the witch, the prophet, the wounded priest, and their pain is not just their own, it is the unfinished business of a lineage. But you must not let that lineage define you. You are not here to merely repeat the pain, you are here to alchemize it. That is the sacred task, not to carry all suffering, but to transform it first by owning what is yours, and then by letting go of what is not. I have seen this countless times in my patients, the one who dreams nightly of drowning, who suffers vague fatigue, who walks into a hospital and leaves with symptoms they did not arrive with. Their body is a battleground of psychic residue, and when I trace it back through dream work, through active imagination, through analysis, we find the same truths they were never taught, where they end and others begin. And so the task emerges, one of differentiation without detachment. The spiritual empath must separate, not in order to abandon others, but to find the self, that ancient and eternal center of consciousness which alone can hold the tension of opposites without collapse. You are not here to dissolve into other stories like salt into water. You are here to witness, to contain, and above all to remain. When I speak of containment, I do not mean suppression. I speak of the psychic vessel, the alembic, in alchemy, which can hold the raw, burning substances of sorrow and joy until transformation occurs. The spiritual empaths often lack such a vessel because their sense of identity is fluid, their psychic boundaries porous. They feel the grief and joy of others before they feel their own. But one cannot transform what one cannot contain. To hold space for others, one must first hold space for oneself. How is this achieved? Not by turning away from the world, but by turning inward, by descending into the labyrinth of the self, by tracing the threads of your pain to their origin, through dreams, through symbols, through silence, through confrontation with your shadow, your anima or animus, and ultimately with the self, that central archetype of wholeness that knows what the ego resists. The empath's wholeness does not come through more giving, but through deeper integration. What you give to others must first be offered to yourself. You must learn to hold your own hand in the night, to speak to your body like a child who needs soothing, to forgive yourself for the moments when you had nothing left to offer. For those of you who identify with this, who feel raw and porous, who carry the burdens of others without being asked, who cry at tragedies that have no name, I want you to understand something deeply mystical. You are not broken. You are unfinished And your unfinishedness is not a defect, but a path. The soul that feels too much has not yet learned to wield that gift as a tool rather than a wound. I have seen empaths reborn, not by retreating into solitude forever, but by reclaiming their wholeness. They go into the underworld of their psyche and return with fire. Not the fire of rage, but the sacred flame of conscious awareness. That which was once unconscious suffering becomes conscious sacrifice, offered not from compulsion, but from clarity. Let me offer a symbol, that of the chalice. The spiritual empath is like a chalice that overflows when unguarded, spilling the contents of their heart into every passing soul. But the goal is not to stop being a chalice. It is to seal the cracks, to choose when to pour, to know what you carry, to hold wine, not poison, to nourish, not deplete. Your sensitivity is not your enemy. It is a clay from which your inner temple is shaped, but clay must be fired to become strong. And that fire is the fire of confrontation with your past, your unmet need, your ancestral ghosts, and most terrifyingly, with your own rage. Yes, even the empath has rage, perhaps especially the empath. It is the rage of having been invisible, of being used, of never being allowed to want without guilt. But this rage is not evil, it is energy. And when honored, it becomes the foundation of boundaries, of identity, of dignity. You must not only ask, what am I feeling, but whose feeling is this? And deeper still, what part of me is letting this enter without question? Because every psychic doorway has a keeper, and if the keeper is asleep, you will be entered by all manner of ghosts. One woman I treated years ago was a nurse. She would weep at the bedsides of her patients, take their anguish home, dream of their death, lose her own appetite for weeks after a stranger passed. She told me, I feel like I'm living 1,000 lives that aren't mine. And I said to her, then whose life are you neglecting? She paused. And for the first time in our work, she wept not for someone else, but for herself. That moment marked the beginning of her integration. You see, the empath often over-identifies with the wounded child in others and in themselves. They project salvation outward. They try to heal the father. They could not reach the mother who did not see them, the sibling who disappeared into addiction, and they reenact that trauma in every friendship, every relationship, becoming healer, fixer, savior. But this pattern is not love, it is bondage. The path forward requires the return to the self, to sit with your own child self and say, you don't need to save anyone. You are already worthy. You are already held. It is this inner holding that breaks the unconscious contract, that allows you to love without losing yourself, to serve without self-sacrifice, to listen without drowning. And then a miracle occurs. Your dreams begin to shift. No longer are you running through burning houses or drowning in oceans. Now you are lighting candles in dark corridors. You are swimming, yes, but toward the light. You meet figures who guide rather than consume. You see your own face reflected in still water. These are not mere images, they are symbols of integration. Your psyche is reorganizing. You are becoming a self, not just a vessel. You may begin to feel anger without guilt. You may find the word no emerging on your lips like a sacred syllable. You may grieve the parts of you that were lost to others' demands. And you may feel a terror, the terror of being seen, not for what you do, but for who you are. Stay with that terror. It is the birth canal of authenticity in time. You will begin to sense a new kind of empathy. Not the empathy that consumes, but the empathy that illuminates. You no longer walk into rooms seeking pain to absorb. You walk in carrying your own centered light. Others may still reach for you, but now you can discern, you can choose. You are not the ocean anymore. You are the lighthouse, and this lighthouse, let me be clear, is not invulnerable. It too must be tended. Its fire must be fed. The empath must create rituals of psychic hygiene, solitude, art, prayer, movement, analysis, silence, not as luxuries, but as necessities. The world does not teach sensitive souls to tend themselves, but your inner world demands it. Otherwise, your gift will rot into resentment. As you walk this path, you will also encounter projections, people who resent your boundaries, who accuse you of being cold when you stop absorbing their chaos. Do not falter. When you stop playing a role in others' unconscious drama, they may rage. Let them. You are not their savior. You are not their sacrifice. The great task of the spiritual empath is to become sovereign. Sovereignty does not mean isolation. It means inner authority. It means living from the self, and the self, that divine center, does not demand your exhaustion. It seeks your wholeness. Now we must speak of something subtler still, of transmutation. For the empath who begins the journey by absorbing the world's suffering must not end their journey simply with boundaries, though that is the first act of healing. The greater work, the holy labor of the mystic path, is the alchemy of suffering to convert the raw chaos of collective pain into the gold of awakened consciousness. This is no metaphor. It is a psychic process, as real as digestion. Just as the body metabolizes food, the soul must metabolize sorrow. And here, the spiritual empath is not merely a feeler. They are, at their highest, an alchemist of the soul. But only when they have passed through the fires of their own disintegration and emerged with the philosopher's stone, that symbol of the integrated self, capable of transformation without self-destruction. When I studied the dreams of those with spiritual sensitivity, a pattern emerged. Symbols of decayed corpses, broken buildings would shift over months into symbols of rebirth, green shoots emerging from soot, strangers handing them keys, animals guiding them across rivers. These are the subtle whispers of the unconscious saying, you are ready. You have grieved, you have died to the identity that was never truly yours. Now you may leave. What is born in this new phase is the mystical self, not a persona worn for others, but a living current that runs beneath all outward appearances. The empath ceases to be a good person and becomes a whole being. They cease to be a healer by trade and instead become a presence in whom healing happens. They do not try to help. Their very being becomes medicine. It is here that we touch the archetype of the wounded healer once more, but this time in its integrated form, not as martyr, but as initiate. The healed empath has descended into the underworld of their own fragmentation and returned not as a rescuer, but as a guide. They no longer mistake sympathy for salvation. They understand that to love another is to stand in full presence, not to fix, not to fuse, but to be with. This is a sacred act. To stand in presence with another's sorrow while remaining rooted in your own being is the mystical union of opposites, compassion and containment, feeling and form. It is the alchemical marriage of the feminine and masculine energies within the empath, once flooded by feeling, now becomes the sacred vessel in which those feelings are blessed by consciousness. Dreams in this phase often reveal symbols of union, the wedding of strangers, the merging of rivers, the appearance of divine twins. These are not to be interpreted literally. They signify the hieros gamos, the sacred inner marriage between the conscious and unconscious, the feeling and the form, the soul and the ego. This is the foundation of individuation, the becoming of what one is, fully, wholly, divinely, and now something happens almost imperceptibly. The empath begins to feel joy again, not as a fleeting moment, but as a birthright. Their joy no longer feels selfish. It becomes sacred. They allow themselves pleasure, laughter, even desire, not as distractions from their spiritual path, but as expressions of it. This is revolutionary for the empath, whose early life often equated joy with guilt. But beware, this is the moment the old identity may rise up like a ghost. The part of you that only knew how to matter through suffering will whisper, "You've changed. You're abandoning your purpose. You're becoming selfish." These are not truths. They are echoes of the unconscious contract you made long ago to earn love through pain. You must, at this point, ritually break that contract, not with anger, but with reverence. Perhaps you write a letter to the younger self who carried that burden. Perhaps you bury the objects of your former martyrdom. Perhaps you speak aloud. In sacred space, I release the vow to suffer in order to belong. I choose to live in wholeness now. Such ritual matters. The psyche responds to image, to symbol, to intentional enactment. This is why dream work, art, dance, prayer, and silence are not hobbies for the empath. They are spiritual disciplines. Through them, the unconscious becomes known. The soul speaks. You may ask, is it not lonely? To stop fusing with others, to stand in sovereignty instead of merging in sympathy. And the answer is yes. At first, it is terribly lonely. But this is the sacred loneliness of the mystic. The desert before the oasis, the stillness before the voice. The loneliness is a threshold, and once crossed, it opens into a community of souls who no longer seek to be saved or to save, but to see and be seen. In that place, love emerges not as sacrifice, but as reverence. You begin to form relationships that are not based on your ability to absorb pain, but on your willingness to be fully present. You attract others who are not wounded seekers, but fellow travelers. And together, you begin to create a new world, not built on codependency, but on conscious communion. The world needs such empaths now, not broken martyrs, but awakened mirrors, people who have walked through the inferno of their own dissolution and emerged with the quiet power of presence, people who can sit in the face of suffering and say, not, let me take this from you, but I see you, I trust you, I am here. This is the medicine of the future, not the endless giving that leads to depletion, but the conscious sharing of energy from a place of overflow. The healed empath does not pour from an empty cup. They become a fountain, sourced from the eternal spring of the self. And this self, this inner divine, does not tire because it does not perform. It radiates. At this stage, the empath often dreams of light, not blinding, but soft. They meet figures robed in white or clothed in fire, not to rescue them, but to walk beside them. They find themselves flying, or walking in meadows, or sitting in quiet places of beauty. These are not fantasies. These are soul memories, the unconscious, showing you your true nature. And so I ask you now, not as a teacher, but as a fellow soul, are you willing to reclaim yourself from the pain that once defined you? Are you willing to feel joy without guilt, to stand in your own energy without apology, to love without losing yourself? This is not a small step. It is a death and a resurrection. The death of the empathic identity rooted in woundedness, and the birth of the mystical self rooted in wholeness. You do not lose your sensitivity, you refine it. You do not stop caring. You start caring consciously. You become not less feeling, but more alive. You walk now not as a servant of sorrow, but as a steward of sacred energy. And now we come to the end, which is not an end at all, but a return, a circling back to the source of your ache, but with new eyes and a new soul. You began this path as one who felt too much, who was perhaps praised for their kindness, but punished for their boundaries. You walked the world like a vessel with no lid, open to every wind and wound. But now you begin to stand not as a shield for others, but as a soul made whole. What was once your torment, the relentless sensitivity, the psychic porousness, the grief that had no name, has become your tuning fork. You are no longer vibrating blindly to the sorrow of others. You are attuned to the field beneath the surface of things. And in that field, the archetypes whisper, not to command you, but to remind you who you are. The spiritual empath, at their most awakened, is the embodiment of the mystic witness. Not the savior, not the martyr, not the rescuer. The witness does not fix the world. They see it, they reflect it. They allow the unspoken to become visible, and in that seeing, in that sacred presence, healing happens not through effort, but through essence. To become a mystic witness is to live as a threshold between the seen and unseen, between form and formlessness. Your presence becomes a portal through which others may find themselves again. You speak less, but your words carry weight. You no longer chase suffering. It finds you because your aura now says, I can hold this without being consumed. And yet you are no longer willing to carry what is not yours. You recognize projection, you decline enmeshment, you serve not the ego needs of others, but the deeper self in them that seeks reflection, not rescue. This transformation is not linear. There are regressions, moments when the old identity returns like a familiar ghost, asking you to bend, to bleed, to be useful again in the ways you once were. But now you recognize it, you speak gently to that part. You say, I know why you're here, but I don't need you to protect me anymore. And in that moment, you reparent yourself. You become the mother and father you never had. You become the sacred inner guardian. That guardian watches not just over your time and energy, but over your dreams. For now, you know the dream world is not separate from the waking one. It is the deeper conversation. It is where the unconscious reveals the hidden choreography beneath your life. And so you pay attention. You keep a journal. You honor symbols. You follow synchronicities not as curiosities but as compass points. You know now that the psyche speaks in image and that your life is a living myth waiting to be interpreted. What then is the deeper purpose of the empath in the world? I have come to believe it is this: to act as bridges between dimensions of consciousness in a fragmented age where reason has devoured mystery and the heart is often sacrificed at the altar of productivity. The awakened empath reminds the world that the soul is real, that it bleeds, longs, listens, dreams. You are the keepers of emotional reality. You are the voices of the invisible, and your strength does not lie in how much pain you can carry, but in how deeply you can transmute that pain into presence. This is not a metaphor. It is psychic labor. It is alchemical work. And it is needed now more than ever. The modern world suffers from dissociation, a loss of feeling, a numbing of the collective body. The empath, when awakened, becomes the nervous system of the culture, helping it feel again, but not chaotically, consciously. You do this not by becoming louder, but by becoming clearer. Your clarity is your healing. Your boundaries are your medicine. Your embodiment is your teaching. When you say no from a place of sovereignty, you teach the world that empathy without selfhood is not virtue, it is violation. And now, something beautiful begins to emerge, the return of your joy. Not performative joy, not people-pleasing lightness, but soul joy. The joy that arises not from approval, but from alignment. You find yourself laughing again, not as an escape, but as a celebration. You feel desire again, not as threat, but as guidance. You sense beauty in the smallest things, a leaf turning in sunlight, the way silence feels in a sacred space. These are not trivial. They are signs. They are proof that you have not only survived, you have remembered what? That you were never meant to be a vessel for everyone else's pain. You were meant to be a vessel for light, that your depth is not a curse. It is the horizon where your soul meets the divine, that you are not here to fix the world. You are here to reveal it, to reflect its pain and its glory, to be a mirror so clear that others finally see the truth of who they are. But let us not end in abstraction. Let us return to your body, for this is where it all lives. Your nervous system is not a burden, it is your instrument. Your breath is not irrelevant. It is your lifeline. The more you inhabit your body, the less you are swept away by the storms of others. The more you ground into your root, the more the archetypes bow to you, not as master or slave, but as partner in becoming the final integration. Then is this to live the myth of your own life, to see yourself as the protagonist of a sacred story, not as victim, not as rescuer, but as one who is becoming whole. The spiritual empath who has walked through fire, through water, through shadow, now stands in the center of their own soul, not needing to be more or less than they are. And from this center, you radiate, you become the flame others gather around, not to take, but to remember their own fire. You become the clear pool in which others glimpse their true face. You become what the mystics have always been, a place where the visible and invisible kiss, not because you tried, but because you are this beloved one, is the dark truth that the world did not break you, it initiated you. Now, walk in your light and carry nothing that isn't yours. Amen.